Good day. All right, so it is Tuesday. It's election day. No one has school today. I'm the only teacher in the building. There are people voting downstairs. I voted a little bit earlier, right at 7 o'clock. And today we are talking about the heliocentric model. Now, if you remember, we have already talked about the geocentric model, where they originally thought there was only 5 planets that circled the Earth. I didn't mention in the last video, but I think I mentioned in class that they thought these planets weren't big planets like Earth, but were actually little crystal balls circling the Earth, reflecting light. So they were bright, star-like objects that just reflected light, and they only thought 5 of them. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn were the only 5 planets they knew about. Then, of course, they thought the moon circled the Earth, the sun, and the stars, and they thought the stars were just these holes in a wall that surrounded the entire solar system, and they shined light from the other side of the wall. And that was the entire universe. There wasn't anything else. They didn't think of other galaxies. They didn't think of black holes. They only thought the universe was the Earth, these crystal balls, the moon and the sun, and the wall that had holes in it. Not very big. It was like the idea that the universe would be as big as it really is, that was a little bit too much. It's pretty unimaginable. It's pretty hard to imagine that is the size of the universe. But then, a Polish astronomer named Copernicus came along, and he said the model didn't quite make sense. You see, they'd been making these observations for years and years. They've been, and we'll talk a little bit about Kepler and a little bit about Tycho Brahe in class, where they made these observations detailed observations of planets and the way they orbited, and the timing of things didn't quite work out. So they said it doesn't quite make sense. It was it started to become too complicated because, and we'll talk a little bit about it in class, about retrograde motion and the planets seeming to move in weird ways. And so Copernicus said a heliocentric model made more sense. Helio meaning sun and center. So Copernicus said a sun-centered made more sense. Now he got in trouble for this because all along the Catholic Church had been saying Earth is in the center, God made the Earth, it's the most important, and they were teaching this as part of their religion. And so Copernicus came along and said, well, maybe that's not quite right. Church didn't like being told they were wrong, and told Copernicus he had to change his ways. Told him, you have to change your mind, you have to tell people you don't believe this anymore. Copernicus didn't want to get in trouble with the church, so he agreed. Partly because he didn't have any hard evidence to support his ideas. It wasn't until Galileo came along and he used a telescope to actually look at things, because they didn't really have telescopes. Telescopes take glass grinding, precise mathematics, and so Galileo came along, and a couple of things. He started looking at the sky with a telescope, and one of the things he noticed, he went and looked at Jupiter. It was a really bright planet, and what he was expecting to see, just make it brighter, a little bit bigger, and when he saw Jupiter, he saw some dots on either side. And then he looked at it a couple nights later, and he saw the dots were moving. And then one day, one of the dots was gone, and the dots had moved around, and these dots on either side of Jupiter was moving around. And he concluded, and maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, what could those dots be? You can tell me in class whether you came up with the answer before I said it out loud. He said these were moons. Now, this was a pretty big deal. He said he discovered 4 moons that go around Jupiter. We know there's more, but his telescope was able to see 4. They were moving around. Sometimes one went right behind Jupiter, and he couldn't see it for a couple days, and then it came back around, and he could see it again. Up until now, everyone had been saying everything goes around the Earth. And here, Galileo discovers some objects that go around Jupiter, not the Earth. And that was... that by itself created a lot of questions about whether or not the geocentric was correct or not. Galileo went on And like I said, he discovered moons of Jupiter. He also noticed that Venus had phases, like the moon does. A full phase, a quarter phase, I'm sorry, it does not have a full phase. It has a quarter phase, a crescent phase, but no full phase. And because it had no full phase, that meant that Venus never went on the opposite side of the Earth as the Sun, because then if the Sun is there, and the Earth is there, and Venus is over here, the light would bounce off of Venus, and we'd be able to see the full phase of Venus. But because we know that Venus orbits the Sun at a closer orbit than Earth, the only time we would see a full phase of Venus is when Venus is on the opposite side of the Sun, and then the Sun's blocking the way, so we can't see Venus in that situation. And so Galileo was able to work this logic out, and figure out that Venus had to go around the Sun, not the Earth. And then Galileo also realized that the stars were suns, like our own sun, but they were really far away. They weren't little holes in a wall. They were actual suns, and then that made the universe so much bigger than what they thought before. Before they thought there was only 5 little crystal balls orbiting the Earth, and now Galileo realizes that the universe is full of stars, and he called the universe the galaxy. He didn't know about other galaxies yet, but even then, the idea that every single bright light was another sun, that by itself was pretty mind-blowing. And so Galileo got quite a bit of trouble for this. The church told him that he had to take everything back, and he refused, and they put him under house arrest, which meant that they locked him up in his own house. They wouldn't let him leave. They wouldn't let people come visit him. They fed him. They let him hang out in his courtyard and do whatever he wants, but he wasn't allowed to leave the house to talk to other people because they were afraid of the message that he had to give to people. He was afraid he was going to convince people that the church was wrong, the church had made a mistake, and then if they believe that, then maybe they don't believe in other things the church is teaching. And so they were really scared of Galileo. They didn't want to kill him because he had lots of friends, and they also didn't want to kill him because then that would make his message go out better. But they did put him under house arrest. After the year that Galileo died was the year Isaac Newton was born, and Isaac Newton continued the idea of mathematically figuring out the science related to the way the planets orbit. And then eventually, later on, more planets got discovered, like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And then finally, asteroids and comets. And really, in the 1900s, later 1900s, when asteroids started getting discovered, that's when the whole thing that's what started Pluto being demoted into a dwarf planet. When they started finding other objects that were the same size as Pluto, and they were finding thousands and thousands of objects that size, they decided that they couldn't really call Pluto a planet anymore. Okay, so that's enough for today. We'll continue some lessons related in class. Next thing we're going to talk about is Edwin Hubble and the Big Bang Theory. I'm really excited about that. All right, make some comments if you wish. Make sure you fill out your capture sheet and enjoy the rest of your day.